Historians have traced electing tribal and village leaders as far back as the 7th and 8th centuries Common Era. But it was the rise of democratic self-government in early 17th century England and the American colonies that ushered in a new age of convincing people to vote for a particular candidate. Hi, I'm Dana Creasy, and welcome to this presentation of my research. While we don't know exactly how it worked in ancient Greece, we do know that in the American colonies, candidates stood for election rather than ran, at least in the conventional sense we know of today. In colonial Williamsburg and the other colonies, candidates stood behind a desk or a set of tables much like these, and the voters would line up in front of them. When it was their turn, they would sign their name, indicating their assent to cast a vote for the candidate who looked them straight in the eye. There was no secret ballot in those days. Such was the state of elections in early America, it being seen as unseemly for a candidate to actually campaign. But it seems the great tradition in the colonies and later early America was to literally buy votes by supplying free liquor, mostly rum and later beer, to everyone who showed up to vote. This was our first evidence of persuasive activities in political campaigning. We've come a long way since then, but in modern times, not only is it illegal to buy votes, even a drink, in many states, bars and taverns are actually closed on election day, leaving campaigning by the candidates as their only option. My research focuses on means to influence voters one way or another, whether to vote for a candidate or an issue, or against. Before the age of radio, and even in the earliest days of radio, literally word of mouth was the only way to convince voters you deserved to be elected. Candidates would travel throughout the countryside giving stump speeches, which got their name from tree stumps on which the candidates actually stood in an attempt to sway the electorate. But by the 1940 presidential election, which pitted incumbent Franklin Delano Roosevelt against Republican Wendell Willkie, sociologist Paul Lazarsfeld and a team from Columbia University studied voter patterns to see what effect the mass media had on voters' opinions. At the time, mass media referred solely to radio, magazines, and newspapers, television development having been shut down during World War II. This early research led Lazarsfeld's team to develop the two-step and later the multiple-step flow theories, which showed that influential people, those with a certain standing in the community, paid much closer attention to the media, learning about critical issues of the day, about candidates, about elections, and other important information, and then passed that on to friends and family and coworkers, but usually with their own take on it. These opinion leaders occupied an important place in the political communications process for many, many years. In 1972, Max McCombs and Donald Shaw worked past the other earlier work and came up with what's known as agenda setting theory. In other words, that the media set the agenda that we, the people, think about. Later researchers established that the media isn't quite as successful at telling people what to think, but are stunningly successful at telling us what to think about. With the rise of social media in the digital age, particularly sites like Facebook and Twitter, where people routinely post images and comments and positive as well as derogatory messages and share information about politics and candidates in an effort to sway votes, we encounter a new phenomenon borrowed from advertising, electronic word of mouth, or eWOM. I took a look at all three theoretical concepts in an attempt to see how and if they work together to make opinion leaders using eWOM the new agenda setters in the political process. After looking at the literature and examining some events like the 2008 presidential election campaign of Barack Obama, who very successfully used social media and particularly eWOM in his quest for the White House, I formed several hypotheses. First, that opinion leaders in the two-step flow theory and the agenda setting theory were really a lot closer than otherwise thought, with opinion leaders functioning not only to set the agenda for friends, family, and coworkers, but sometimes setting the agenda for what the media actually covered in a kind of reverse direction. Second, that eWOM is an effective and efficient method of influencing voter patterns when combined with social media, more successful than the traditional means of persuasion, television, and radio and newspaper advertising. And finally, that the younger generation of Americans, up to about age 29, are the most persuadable by eWOM because they're the most active on social media. I propose testing these hypotheses through a combination of quantitative and qualitative means, analyzing surveys and question data, as well as content analysis of social media collected during the 2016 presidential election. What came out of this work was some surprising indications, including that indeed flow theory and agenda theory have some connection, and the linkages, while not completely understood yet, are promising for the purposes of both this study and future research. Second, that eWOM is rapidly overtaking traditional means of persuasion used in political campaigning, and to a great effect. In particular, the grassroots campaign of Senator Bernie Sanders, which turned from what the senator initially called a campaign just to raise awareness of the issues into making him a legitimate contender for the Democratic nomination. Much of the fundraising and recruitment of activists for his campaign was based on successful eWOM messages placed over social media. Finally, the hypothesis that only the younger voters are influenced by social media and eWOM was not supported, in part because of the increasing use of social media by older demographics, the over 50 generation being the fastest adopter of Facebook today, and the strong messages of eWOM that are supplied by both individuals with strong ties and weak ties, in other words, friends and family, and just online acquaintances. In any event, eWOM appears to be here as a political persuasive tool into the 21st century, as is social media, creating a whole new set of opportunities for political consultants who can master those skills, and overnight, turning those who ignore the lessons of digital technologies into tech dinosaurs, whose skills are called into question and maybe even their suitability for higher office. I'm Dana Creasy. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and learned a few things. Thanks for joining me.